banned in Iran because of her dress. It was felt that it was too offensive to the sensitivities of Iranians for her to appear on screen looking like that. So the issues of kind of women's appearance, even when they're not playing football, their involvement in football can be a cause of some concern. So this just before it skips. Oh, wait for it to skip. Yeah. So, in very broad terms, women's football took off in Latin America in the 1920s and 30s, and women started to play football matches against other women's teams. This was especially prevalent in Brazil, which was from the outset one of the countries that incorporated football as a really important part of its national identity and what the country was, how it defined itself, both internally and in relation to its neighbours, particularly Argentina and Uruguay. However, 1941, a rather dictatorial regime banned women's football in Brazil on the grounds that it was not compatible with a woman's role and a woman's activities. And that ban on women's football in Brazil lasted through till 1979, when it was finally lifted under another military regime, but was transitioning back to democracy and was kind of relaxing things and allowing society to open up a little bit. But that ban was in place for the best part of 40 years in Brazil, and in some other parts of Latin America, football developed for women in the sort of boom of the 1960s of social liberation, revolutionary politics across the region, most notably in the Cuban Revolution. But other countries such as Chile, Peru, and also Mexico in the 1960s that had rather more progressive politics, you saw the emergence of women starting to play football in those countries. So it's very much gone hand in hand with broader political, social and cultural developments in that region. Mexico were one of the early stars of women's world football and played in this. If you look on Wikipedia, you will find that there's the World Cup started in 1991 for women in China. But there was an unofficial World Cup in 1970 and 1971 that FIFA had no part in and didn't want to recognise. But Mexico did really well in that and hosted the 1971 version where they finished as runner-up. It's really since the 1990s, though, that women's football in Latin America has taken off again. It coincides with the emergence of most of the countries across the continent from periods of very repressive dictatorship through the 1970s and 80s, and it's when you get the kind of social and political openings that emerge after those that women's participation in football becomes a reality in most countries. So Brazil has kind of retaken its place at the forefront in Latin America and has been a constant presence in international competition, so kind of showcasing women's participation in Latin America to the world through the Women's World Cup. It was in the Canadian World Cup earlier this year. They started a series of tournaments that mirror the men's tournament, so we have a Copa América Femenina for women's national teams that started off with only 3 teams, but by the end of the same decade we have 9 teams, so all of the teams of the Latin American Federation are represented. We have the foundation of national women's leagues that continue into the 2000s. But by the time we're getting into the last decade or so, as you can see, a very significant number of women registered as football players in Brazil. Other countries are less well documented. And they've most recently started a Copa Libertadores that's between Latin American women's teams from different nations that play against each other. Brazil's won every one of those except for one. So we have a picture over the last 20 years of a very rapid kind of expansion and development that's parallel to broader processes of women's participation in society. The only team to have defeated Brazil in the Copa Libertadores, there we go, was Universidad Católica from Chile. Chile, another of those countries that's been fairly progressive in its politics. And no coincidence that both Chile and Brazil have had women presidents at the same time. So it's part of a much broader process of women gaining visibility, women coming into positions of public prominence that are represented through the media, that are part of people's daily experience, of women in positions that have previously been very much male-dominated. So this is just a tattoo on the leg of one of those Colo-Colo women players. You can't really make out. It says, "My life is football." And this, I think, is just demonstrative of the way in which women in Latin America are increasingly starting to identify themselves in terms of their participation in football. So they're really kind of appropriating it as a female space as well as a male space, and taking it under their own wing, and very strongly gaining a sense of self through that participation in that. So it's become a real sort of touchstone for the way that women can identify themselves as well as men. Sorry, that's shuffled a little bit on the screen in terms of the sizing, but this is undoubtedly the most well-known Latin American woman footballer, Marta, the Brazilian national team. Can't really see it, but she was World Player of the Year 5 times in a row, 5 years in a row, voted FIFA's World Player of the Year for women. She's also one of very few women who's come into a kind of an international soft politics role through her nomination to the one of the UN ambassadors for the World Cup in Brazil. She's also had a UN developmental role and has played in a lot of charity matches alongside Zinedine Zidane and other kind of male stars of the game. And she's become celebrated as a football player, not as a beautiful woman, not as a woman on a beach in a bikini, but in her own right as an athlete, she is recognised for that being who she is. However, I'm rather unfortunate that Pelé himself recognised how talented she is by describing him as essentially an adjunct to a male description. He described Pelé in a skirt. So she can't be Marta. There's got to be a male point of reference by which she can gain some sort of validity as a football player. I'm just waiting for this to skip. But one of the other characteristics of this period since the 1990s is the development of women's football literature. So we have very isolated examples of women writing literature about football from the 1920s through to the 1970s. Very limited examples across the continent, and that really reflects the place that football had as a kind of female, feminine activity. But since the period when Latin American football has become very much a woman's game, we have the development of these collections of short stories. So we have here 2 collections of short stories, anthologies of football stories written entirely by women. We have a documentary film made in Argentina that's all about women's football, and we have another documentary. This was a recent documentary, but it's about a woman who in the 1960s and 70s in Argentina was a very keen football fan, but was known as La Raulito. So she took on a masculine name to be able to take part in the male domain of football that wasn't somewhere that women could easily take part. If we just contrast how that's changed over the decades, football in Argentina is now very much a place for women. I was going to ask people, one of these covers for the books was designed by a woman, and one of them was designed by a man. Can you guess which? This was the one designed by a man, which continues to place women as a sort of sexual fantasy for a man's gaze, even when they're playing football. And that's one of the things that continues to interest me, is the way in which women's presence in football is still, despite people like Marta and the excellence of women's football teams, still continue to be projected essentially from a very masculine gaze that, as this suggests, continues to present women in sport very much in terms of the images of soft pornography. So this was a little kind of competition between these 2 women. She plays for the Colombian national women's team. She's a very good Argentinian woman player, but they did a keepy-uppy competition. She did it in high heels and hot pants. She didn't do quite so well as her who did it in football boots. But why on earth should she be having to do a keepy-uppy competition in high heels and hot pants, unless it's to conform to kind of a male gaze, objectifying women. So this is my final slide. I'm just waiting for it to skip again. So this continues to be, I think, a very much male-dominated world. So even these competitions that I've said, international football competitions, that are projected by a stilettoed football boot, a nice pink football boot, a football player wearing a big frilly skirt and long plaited hair. So all of these images are very much kind of constructed either by men or conforming to a male gaze that sexualises women. A women's football team aren't sitting with feet apart, they all have to have their legs nicely crossed. This one I'll translate for you. If a woman knows what this is, the offside line, don't let her go. So there's continuing assumptions that women don't understand football, they don't play football, and it continues to be constructed, at least in many media representations, as a male activity from a male perspective. But hopefully you'll have had a little bit of an idea that that's not necessarily the case, and that underneath all of this there is actually a huge amount going on whereby women are claiming a space and claiming agency for themselves, and in many cases defining themselves as serious athletes through participation in a previously men's world, in parallel with women in politics, in many of the same countries where this is going on. I'll leave it there. I know that we have more to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. So next person up is Andrew Lynn. Yeah, don't know what happened with the times there. Apparently, so David is from Andrew. Sorry, is from the School of English, and he's going to be talking about the battle between English and national languages in Nordic universities. So we've been to the Central Russian Steppe, and I now know what the Central Russian Steppe is. We've been to South America, and now we're going to Nordic countries. And then after that, we also have another languages for you, because Ed will be discussing the outreach work we do at university with languages.
Thanks very much. So, I'm talking about a topic which is a very significant one in terms of the international nature of higher education and of academic work. There's an assumption which underlies the internationalisation of higher education that as people travel the world, as researchers or as students, they can simply function through English. Courses can be put on in English regardless of the fact that the majority of the students, if not all the students taking them, may not be native English speakers. And this will simply be okay for all concerned. And what I want to say a little bit about is a context in which excessive use of English, particularly in universities, is seen to be politically problematic, and perhaps somewhat surprisingly, the part of the world where this has been voiced most vehemently and where there's been a particularly high-level response to trying to address this issue is precisely in those countries where English is particularly well understood and used to a particularly high level. So the first decade of the new millennium was a period in which language planning as a political activity was hotly pursued across the Nordic countries. And this began with a meeting of the Nordic Council of Ministers in 2001 to address the question, which you can see and no doubt perfectly happily read on the screen in front of you, the Nordic languages in a time of internationalisation, status and perspective. So the ministers, the high-level ministers of these countries felt that the language situation was sufficiently challenging and important to make it the theme for one of their international conferences. In the wake of this meeting in 2001, the individual countries began to address the language situation in a formal way. Sweden was the first country to do so, and the typical process in the individual countries was for there to be a green paper, so a survey of the language situation, typically carried out by the National Language Council. That was the 2001 report, Morning Moon, and then that led typically to a white paper, so a government-level report on the language situation, drawing on the Language Council's findings. In Sweden, this was Bästa språket, the best language, in 2005. And Sweden took the process to the end of the line, leading in 2009, after years of debate and further investigation, to a new language law. And in Sweden, this partly involved the enshrining of the national language as the official language of the country, which hadn't been formally the case before. So Sweden set the ball rolling. In Denmark, a similar process, a Language Council survey of the language situation, and then a government report. Same in Norway, 2005-2008, and on across the region. Finland is a bilingual country. Finnish and Swedish exist side by side. Finnish-Swedish also was the subject of a report of the language ecology around in 2003. That, as you will immediately recognise, is Icelandic. So an Icelandic national survey, no it wasn't, that was Faroese. So these languages are not dissimilar, as even if you don't know Nordic languages, you can kind of see from the similarities some of the terms that keep recurring. So a survey on the Faroe Islands and also in Iceland brings the region together in its concern for looking at the language situation. The principal issue in all these surveys was this, expressed on the website of the Norwegian Language Council, but no matter what might have been addressed, no matter what range of language issues might have been included in these reports, fundamentally underpinning it all was this anxiety: how to prevent the mother tongue being replaced by English or other foreign languages in important areas of society. Now, suggesting that other languages might be in danger of replacing the native languages is pretty disingenuous. That's a way of making it not seem like an attack on the presence of English by suggesting that other foreign languages are part of this situation. In fact, the question is precisely how to resist the overwhelming use of English and the damage that is perceived as doing to the robustness of the national languages in important areas of society. Now, important areas are kind of economically valuable areas, so typically in business and commerce. Increasing numbers of national companies across the Nordic countries are making English their official language of activity, so no matter that all those sitting in the boardroom might be Norwegian, the company policy is that discussions go on, reports are written in English. And this has been described as domain loss. So not that Norwegian, Swedish and Danish are disappearing altogether, but that certain domains of activity are being lost to the national languages. Domain loss has kind of bubbled up quite quickly as a kind of language political issue. Here's an excerpt from a study of 2005 looking at the emergence of domain loss, which was kind of unknown as a problem around the turn of the new millennium, but in academic linguistic circles, domain loss became more and more talked about and was soon picked up by journalists as a sort of threat and part of a package of general ecological threat, just as the Scandinavian forests might be damaged by pollution from the rest of Europe, so by association the national languages are being polluted and threatened in terms of they're being lost in certain areas by English. So domain loss has kind of bubbled up as a widely referred to problem in Nordic language circles. But a rather more measured study a couple of years ago came to the conclusion that this problem isn't really fully understood, it's not fully defined. Lack of clarity in such a fundamental concept as domain, the scholars wrote, doesn't promote communication about the problem, let alone its resolution. So this issue has been kind of sitting around, has been widely discussed, but hasn't necessarily been kind of fully understood and appreciated. So, is there a problem? Are certain domains of language use genuinely being lost to English? Well, there's certainly plenty of evidence to suggest that this might be happening. So we find a quick web search reveals a Norwegian website about national business with an English language label, doing business in Norway. There are strong incentives to go to Nordic universities to study and to do so in English. So studying and doing business may indeed be being handed over to English. There is an annual survey carried out by a company called Education First, and it's been carried out every year for about the last 5 or 6 years, looking at results in their own English language tests, and then plotting countries on this hierarchy of those that are exhibiting a very high proficiency in English down to those that exhibit a very low proficiency in English. And it won't surprise you to see that over the past few years there have been one or two kind of pretenders to the crown of most proficient country in the use of English, but the Nordic countries are there or thereabouts in terms of the top of the league. Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Norway in 2012, 2013, the Netherlands, Estonia, and Austria squeaking in. But fundamentally, it is the Nordic countries which this evidence suggests are indeed the ones most able to use English in the most contexts. And there is the Education First English Proficiency Index map of the world, showing the Nordic countries and one or two other bits and pieces in Northern Europe as the most highly proficient. So it appears to be the case that indeed English is widely used to a high level, and that there is an opportunity for Nordic citizens to use it increasingly in preference to the native languages. So here's some evidence from higher education to indeed support the argument that certain kind of key domains are being handed over to English. So these are the language choices in PhD theses in the Norwegian universities in 2010. So in science areas there were 377 PhD theses written in that year, and only 1% of those written in Norwegian, which I find quite surprising, in that there was indeed 1% of these theses written in the native language, when the absolutely overwhelming tendency is to try to kind of speak to the international academic community, which means using English. Medicine and health, similarly very, very little Norwegian being used in this key academic genre, and if we work through the disciplines, we find that even in a national discipline like law, only half the theses are being written in the national language. That 54% of theses written in Norwegian in 2010 in law was in fact a rogue year, and typically the majority of law theses are being written in Norwegian, 80%, 90%. So this kind of general blanket anxiety that academic activities being handed over to English appears not to be entirely supportable across the range. In the humanities subject, there's a slight decrease in the amount of Norwegian being used in PhD theses. In the social sciences, numbers are quite low, and the harder sciences, of course, is very little being used, but it's not a blanket anxiety the evidence seems to suggest. In master's theses, slightly lower level, which is a more kind of national activity, there's more Norwegian being used, but nonetheless there's a general tendency in the direction of English. So Norwegian master's theses coming down to the advantage of English. The real losers, however, are other languages, master's theses being written in German or French or other languages, which are increasingly negligible. So what to do about this then? Well, as part of all this language political debate, a new policy was developed, that of parallelingualism, if you can get your mouth around it, a more concerted effort to use the languages in parallel, so not simply to default to English as an academic language, but to try to be a bit more kind of nuanced and sensitive about doing so. Unfortunately, like domain loss as a kind of specific language political problem, parallelingualism as a response to that has not been terribly well defined or consistently used. So an article written last year found the following for Denmark: while parallelingualism is often the overtly expressed ideology in language policy documents, this paper by Christina Hultgren exposes and contrasts how it is apparently understood by different actors. It finds that the so-called guardians of Danish, such as the Danish Language Council, use this policy to mean more Danish, whereas the international universities have interpreted this policy of parallel language use to mean more use of English. And if you look in slightly more detail at how this new policy of parallelingualism has been interpreted, there is indeed significant variation. So the Centre for Internationalisation and Parallel Language Use, to try to support this policy at the University of Copenhagen, talks about a situation in which two languages are considered equal in a particular domain, where the choice of language depends on what is deemed most appropriate and efficient. So real kind of parallel existence, not favouring one language over another. If you look at a more national document, the Norwegian Council's review of the language situation, they talk about it in slightly different ways, where one language, in our case Norwegian, will always be the preferred language use. So there's a much more kind of hard commitment to trying to increase the amount of Norwegian being used. So at the kind of political level, both domain loss and the response to it, parallelingualism, are kind of kicking around in political documents and in the media that don't seem to be fully understood or worked out. So let's look very quickly then at two contexts in which some kind of change has been attempted to be made, where there's been an effort to move from language policy development to actually kind of changing hearts and minds. And the first of these is business. So in 2009 in Norway, the Language Council and the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprise got together to produce this document called Language Common Sense for Business, where they tried to explain why it would actually be more advantageous to use the national language, where certain audiences would be more responsive to Norwegian than to English, and there was lots of sensible advice given. But unfortunately, at the end of this document, it was stated explicitly, this is not a reprimand, so we're not telling you off for using too much English, but a consciousness raising. It is not being done with a raised finger or as an order. So this is where things begin to fall short. Yes, there may be a problem, yes, there may be kind of national reasons for doing something about it, but when it comes to implementing a policy, there's a kind of a withdrawal from the front line. The same has been the case in universities. So in 2006, there was a proposal for language policy for universities and colleges in Norway, with this issue of which languages to use and how not simply to default to English at the heart of the discussion. And the document finished with an expression of the concern about how the principle of parallelingualism can be realised in practice. One proposal was that for every PhD thesis, a summary of 10% of the length of the total thesis be included in the other language. Now, I examined a PhD thesis in Oslo last year, written in Norwegian. It's about 400 pages long, so there should have been a 40-page summary in English. There wasn't. There was a 1.5-page summary. So little has been done to actually do something about this perceived problem, if indeed it is a problem. And looking back over the last decade at universities' responses to this issue, it was found that despite good beginnings in the years 2007-2010, little has subsequently been done to transform the goals into concrete practice. So, we have a context in which English is used at a very high level. That should be an advantage, you might have thought, in terms of international engagement, but this is in tension with kind of national anxiety about the damage this might be doing to the national language. Such policies have been developed trying to combat it, but as is so often the case in a democracy, actually implementing the policy is problematic. Forcing people to use a language they don't want to use is not something you can do unless you are a police state or a totalitarian regime and you can actually send people to prison or properly sanction them for their language use. So that's that.
Okay, so we'll go straight over to Ed next. Just to get my top. We're over a little bit, but I'm sure Ed can speed up and we'll get done. Just a quick note, if you're interested, right after this session, in here, Dr. Timothy Cooper, is going to be giving an introduction to Chinese Mandarin. So if you want to learn how to speak some Chinese Mandarin, stay there. So Ed is going to be discussing a passport to languages, skills outreach for language at the University of Sheffield. So Ed is the outreach activities officer for the Faculty of Arts and Humanities and is going to be discussing how we sort of reach out into the wider community as a civic university.
Okay, thanks very much. Hello everyone. Yes, I will try and get through things as quickly as I can. So yes, I'm here to talk to you about Passport to Languages. This is the university's programme of language outreach activities that takes place in schools and colleges, primarily within the Sheffield City region, but also beyond. We send students, we send students to Newcastle and down to Birmingham and London as well, so we try and spread out quite a bit. Just going to run through things quite quickly. Right, so Passport to Languages. Passport to Languages is specifically a widening participation project that covers a range of different activities that we run. Just to run through them quickly, we do Key Stage 3 taster activities, take place in schools. We have a project called Adopt a Class. There's the Year 10 university visit that takes place every year. Year 12 Discover Languages at the University of Sheffield, and we also run revision days for GCSE students. To give you a little bit more detail though, but before I continue, does everybody, I'll just quickly explain what I mean by widening participation. I don't know whether or not anyone's quite up to do with widening participation. Widening participation is our project to try and encourage students to come to university from backgrounds, students from backgrounds who have traditionally lower rates of participation in higher education. So these could be students who don't have parental history of higher education, they could be mature students or potential mature students. BME learners is a big target area for the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. But it's not just necessarily about encouraging people to come to university, it's about supporting them throughout university and beyond university as well. Traditionally, as an institution and as a faculty, we've done very well on the getting in aspect, but we are trying to do more of the getting through and getting on aspects of widening participation. These are some of the barriers that we have, that we face when we're dealing with some of the students that we're working with. Situational barriers to entering higher education that include just the simple cost of higher education. Trying to explain to a student why they should spend £9,000 a year on higher education is becoming more and more of a challenge, particularly as students get increasingly savvy about what they might actually be able to expect for that £9,000 a year. The simple lack of time. A lot of the students that we're working with often ask why is it worth going to university and spending 3 years of going to lectures and going to seminars when I can finish my A-levels and get a job and do something else. Institutional barriers. These are barriers that are generally in place just because of the nature of the institutions that we're in. Obviously, as an institution, we have certain entry requirements that we want students to meet, which we can't necessarily always be flexible over. Some of the students that we work with from widening participation backgrounds are subject to, or do receive, adjusted offers, but of course we have to maintain some admissions procedures. This sometimes means saying to students that Sheffield is a fantastic university, it's an amazing university, and we do honestly believe that. But have a look around. Sheffield might not be the place that you want to go and do university. Also, dispositional barriers. Often, as I say, a lot of the students that we're working with question why it's worth going to higher education, and we really have to sort of get around that question, why getting a degree is really worth it. This is a particularly with reference to languages. One of the things that we're trying to overcome here is, which touches a little bit, I suppose, on what Andrew was saying. Some of the students will ask us, why is it worth doing a languages degree when everybody speaks English? Well, because everybody doesn't speak English. And we are often talking about the advantages that a language degree can bring. So, these are some of the key groups that we're working with. Students from state schools, students from low participation neighbourhoods. This is a measure that's been produced by Offer and HEFCE. That's the Office for Fair Access and the Higher Education Funding Council for England, to whom we have to report all of our spending. Low participation neighbourhoods is simply defined as an area where a young person stands a lower likelihood of going on to higher education. NSEC is parental occupation. First generation into university, the evidence shows that a student whose parents didn't go to university are much less likely to go to university themselves. Black and minority ethnic groups, as I said before, students from a care background, students who have at some point been in care or been in a looked after environment are generally less likely to go on to higher education. Often, as we said, because of a lack of confidence working in those kinds of environments. Students with disabilities and mature students, all these groups are, for whatever reason, less likely to go on to higher education, and that's one of the things we're trying to overcome. Okay, so specifically with regard to languages, some of the activities that we do then. The Key Stage 3 tasters, as I said before, these take place in school, and they are introductions to why languages are important. They're comprised of very short taster activities in a mix of familiar and unfamiliar languages. So the students have to complete usually 5 challenges. And the activities could be in French, German, Spanish, Norwegian if we have student ambassadors that will speak Norwegian, Chinese if we have student ambassadors available that can speak Chinese, Japanese. Very often some of the most popular activities we have are in the more unusual languages. A lot of the students that we work with at this stage are learning either French, German or Spanish, but if we can take an activity to them in Japanese or Czech or Polish, it can be quite exciting to them. It's also particularly important in the Sheffield City region because we do work with a lot of Polish children. I don't know whether or not anyone knows, but there are around 9,000 Polish speakers in Sheffield. And they're a community that we haven't traditionally engaged with very much, so we are trying to get more involved. This is from a widening participation point of view. Adopt a class. I won't go on to all of the blogs because I don't know that we've got quite enough time, but this is a project where students who are on their year abroad engage with a school in the local area through a blog. And through regular emails, and we do offer Skype sessions as well for the schools, depending on whether or not they've got the technology set up. The top one, Robin she was on her year abroad last year, and she's still maintaining her blog as basically a travel blog. She's recently been to Iceland, so I'm quite jealous. And the other 4 are just some of the students that are currently on their year abroad. They have proved to be really, really popular. We've got students, as I say, in Mexico, in Belgium, in France. We've got a student in South Korea at the moment. And one of the great appeals of this particular project is that one of the things that can put students off going into higher education is a lack of knowledge and a lack of confidence for how they would get on in the year abroad. This is really there to help familiarise them with the whole process and really the opportunities that come from being part of it. The Year 10 university visits, these are free full-day events just to aim to raise aspirations to study in higher education and to take on a language degree. Participants find out again why languages are important, and we go into a little bit more detail about how languages can bring immense benefits in terms of employability. I've read this morning that there's been a recent study that's come out that says that for the first time there's a general consensus among UK employers that a second language is the most sought after skill, which is great news as far as trying to advertise the importance of languages is concerned. Participants also develop a better understanding of what university is in general and how it's different from school, as well as meeting some of our current undergraduates and staff members as well. We then go into a bit more detail on the Year 12 Discover Languages Days, where we have a little bit more in-depth activities to do with language study at university, and specifically at the University of Sheffield. This is where we start to push the University of Sheffield a little bit more. They will attend a subject seminar that relates to a subject that they're likely to be studying already. It is a little bit tricky now that languages are not a compulsory GCSE or A-level, so one of the aims of the entire project is to advertise the benefits of languages to them at Key Stage 3, because of course if they don't choose to take up a language at GCSE, they're not going to choose it at A-level, they're not going to come and study it here. So we do try and take a sort of long-term view of this. It also involves a campus tour, talks on student finance, some taster activities in some more unusual languages as well, and also a bit of a discussion on dual or individual languages, because of course as a university we have a huge range of combined honours degrees options, including the BA in modern languages that will allow the students to study 3 languages, which is quite popular. Okay, some of the reasons that we tend to push on to the students about why we feel this work is quite important. This is a slightly older article now from a couple of years ago about degree courses in freefall, and languages have been quite a major target area for us since then. We're also losing languages at the rate of 1 a fortnight. Again, this is an article that's about 12 months old, but it did make me think there was a research project that was taking place not so long ago. I think it was at the National Archives, but I'm not 100%, that was basically trying to record and save languages that were on the verge of dying out. My particular favourite was a language that was, it's now, or at least at the time, was only spoken by 3 people in Indonesia, and they were all in their late 80s and they hated each other. So we're the only 3 people left in the world that could speak this language, and they never did because they didn't get on with the other people who could speak it. So this is something that's taken quite seriously. And these are some of the benefits that we advertise to the students when we get them to come in and when we're telling them about how wonderful languages are. Students with a second language generally do better in their academic performance. It's a great opportunity to prepare for the future and increase your employability. The mental health one I thought was quite an interesting one. The multilingual brain is apparently quicker, nimbler, and more resistant to Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia, which is quite an interesting one. And one of the ones that always goes down well with the Year 12s is bilingual people are sexy. The sexiest people are those that have a second language, apparently. Okay, we are largely dependent on language ambassadors for the delivery of our activities. We use our undergraduate ambassadors from the School of Languages and Cultures and the School of East Asian Studies, and they're the guys that really make it work. They're the guys that design and deliver our taster activities. They're the guys that deliver our presentations on how wonderful and how important having a second language is. They help me out a lot running events, and they really bring the university and the language to life. Some of the activities that they've developed have been absolutely brilliant. We've got a range of activities that we've now started to put together that we'll make available to schools. We've got things like French tongue twisters, which is hard to say anyway. We've got things like identifying different body parts in different languages. We've got activities based around music. We've got literally all sorts of things. And these are the guys that really make it happen. Yeah, pretty much sums up everything that I was going to say. I don't know whether or not we've got time for questions.
If anyone has any questions, just sort of can wait around a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah, we are overrunning, apologies. So we'll end there. Thank you very much everyone for coming. That was the final talk. Ed got to finish the week. So thank you to everyone who spoke today, as well as anyone who spoke throughout the week and anyone who came during the week. I know we have a regular in the corner now. There are still more events coming up this weekend for World Week, so please look through the brochure.
Before you do that,
Yeah, no, sorry. Yes, okay. 他讲 Mandarin， 教我们怎么严格。哦，是不一样的。你们应该有稍微不一
So like ma
真的是 Chinese。
something that you probably need. Just do that to get to use of
今天可以一直讲话，你的孩子，然后你呢，可能让那个地方没想，这样子你们挺快乐。
Well, yes.
How are you? You can use it today.
Sorry? I mean, for the history book? Yeah,
This one here.
Thursdays coinciding with the cafe. And now we've moved to Wednesdays.
Oh, I see. That's really nice.
Yeah, it's a shame, mate. Good to see you again. Yeah. Go and see. You stay for this one? Okay, so I've in this small little select group. Here you go. Everybody needs one of these. There we are. There we go. Keep things simple. There we have it. And there you go. That's it, thank you. Are you staying?
I am. I've had to head off this way.
Right, okay.
I have actually been at a meeting, but I just can't resist the temptation.
Right, fair dues,
That would be fantastic.
Yeah. I should just correct something. I'm sure Matt won't mind me that he said just now if you were here. I'm not going to be teaching anybody to speak Chinese. If for no other reason, I'm totally unqualified to teach anybody to speak Chinese. What we are going to be doing is learning how to pronounce Chinese names. Yes. So it's a much more limited aim, but I hope one that is still quite useful. There we go. One of those. Right.
Struggling my way through, I was referring to the Xinjiang Zhou period, I believe it's pronounced, I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds.
Full of anxieties.
That sounds about right. Okay, I'll be just to say at the beginning, this is a kind of much abbreviated version of something I do for university staff that will take about 2 hours over. So it's going to be a lot quicker today because we've only got about 45 minutes or something like that. So it's going to be a bit of a rattle through. Having said that, I still can say what I'd always say in the classes I do for staff, and that is I can pretty much guarantee that I'm going to send you away today if you're somebody who isn't used to pronouncing Chinese names, probably being able to do it better than you would have been able to before. If any of you are Chinese, I apologise because the pronunciations are not going to be absolutely brilliant. But for those of us, I work on the assumption, to be absolutely honest, because my audiences are normally made up of native English speakers. So some of my assumptions work on that basis. But I think a lot of it is still applicable, whatever your basic language. This little exercise to start with, though, is definitely aimed at people whose first language is English. Could you put up your hand if your first language is English? If you are a native speaker of English. 2 of you. Okay, this is for you two. Have either of you seen this word before?
Never.
Never. Okay. It's not you have, right? You're not allowed to say anything. Okay? This is for those who are native English speakers and also who haven't seen it before. So it's definitely you two. It's not even an English word, but if it were an English word, how do you think you would pronounce it? Either of you.
So I already know this one.
You already know, sir. It is entirely up to you. How would you pronounce that?
I would hesitate.
Yes.
And I would probably say something like beauty.
Do you know, I think that would be a fair stab. Something like goatee. So in other words, if we, like the 3 of us, if we're native English speakers, if we saw that, we'd probably pronounce it goatee. But the important point is that you said you'd hesitate. You wouldn't leap in, you'd look at it. Some research I was interested in seeing recently, my wife is an educational psychologist, so I think I saw it in some literature she was reading. You can scan brains now and look at how brain activities work. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to scan anybody's brain. But they looked at, I think it was children whose native language was Italian, and then they had a group of children whose native language was English. And they basically did various things to see how quickly they could process information. And very interestingly to me, I'm somebody who's interested in languages and in brain function, the kids whose native language is Italian could process information a lot faster, significantly faster. And the research went on to suggest that the reason for this was that native speakers of English are held back because of the inconsistent rules of pronunciation. So what we're always doing as English speakers, even worse if you're not a native speaker and you've had to learn it, is we have to look at a word, and even if it's just taking split seconds or bits of a second, our brain has to process how it's going to be pronounced. Whereas if you're a native speaker of Italian, where the pronunciation rules are much simpler and crucially much more consistent, that happens a lot faster. That's just a little byproduct. This little word itself was coined, it's believed to be by the British philosopher George Bernard Shaw. And he was using it to make points about kind of language, linguistics and philosophy, but I think he can make just as good a point about pronunciation. He said, how would we pronounce this word? His students were all English speakers. They went anywhere between goatee and gotty. Some people went maybe cotty, okay? And George Bernard Shaw said at the front of the lecture theatre, I'm not sure, let's see how we go about pronouncing this in English. GH, this randomly generated word, enough, okay, enough, okay, so GH in that word is pronounced, okay, like that. O, how would you pronounce O? Let's randomly generate a word with an O in. Women, good word, yeah, okay, so women, so the O is pronounced I. Okay, good. So we've just got the T and the I. Let's stick them together. They look like they work together. How would you pronounce T and I together? Let's randomly generate a word. Position. Position. So the TI is making a sh sound. Okay. So Bernard Shaw said, there's the pronunciation of GHOTI, fish. And if you're at all interested in indie music, there was a band a few years ago called Fish. Spelled like that. This is simply to make the point that English is famously, infamously, horrendously inconsistent. I've struggled for years, as well as learning a bit of Chinese, but learning a bit of Arabic. And I find Arabic a particularly difficult language, but one of the good things about it is its pronunciations, like in Chinese, are very consistent. So there's other things you can worry about, but the thing we're always worrying about in English, and as my Arabic tutor said to me, the thing, even after years of learning English, they still struggle with pronunciation you don't in other languages. So, not going to be teaching you Chinese at all. I'm going to be introducing you, or if you know it already, reminding you maybe, about a system that is called pinyin, which is basically rendering Chinese sounds into Roman alphabet. Okay? The great thing about this is that it's a very consistent system. Once we've learned these weird letter combinations, weird to us as native English speakers, all we have to do, keep practicing, and we've got them. Anybody who doesn't know how to pronounce that word, how might we guess at pronouncing it? That is a Chinese noun.
That's the word I've just used.
That's the word you just used.
Which I always panic about. I think that in terms of the Joe or
But you know how to, yeah. Do you know how to pronounce it?
I'm getting Joe.
You're already going. Okay. When I do this with staff, 90% of English-speaking staff go, oh God, I've seen this name loads of times, and I just kind of guess. And I say, well, how do you guess with it? And they'll say something like Zhu or Zhao. Those are the most common versions, okay? And what native English speakers are doing is, first of all, looking at it and going, help, internally. Letter combinations we don't have in English. Then they go, that looks a fairly exotic combination to an English speaker, so it'll do something like sh, and the OU is a bit odd as well, so let's make zhu, zhao, things like this. And zhao is the most common. And all we have to do is essentially learn that ZH is pronounced J, and the OU is pronounced O, and we've got it as Joe. And the mystery, I think, starts to disappear or fade away slightly at this point, once we realise that these letter combinations are just inconsistent, fairly simple things. And of course, once we've got that equals Joe, then we can already start guessing at what other things would say. How might we pronounce that?
I'll go for Jackie.
Go for Jan. And why wouldn't you? And then if we saw that, we might, and we already knew that that was Joe, we'd have a fair stab at that being. This kind of exercise really appeals to people who, as kids, kind of love making up languages, or you do little puzzles or anything like that. So, if ZH and OU equals Joe, what might G and OU equal?
Surely not good.
Surely not Goo, no, because otherwise that would be Jew.
Oh, yeah.
So if that is saying O,
Go.
there we go. You see, we can start, you're already starting to see the patterns and learn the things. All we have to do, and this is a crucial thing, I stress it, all we have to do from now on is learn what these letters are doing and apply them every time, and it is almost 100% consistent. Are either of you, are any native Chinese speakers? Yeah. You'll have to apologise that we're not talking about tones or anything like that today. Just to get one complication out of the way, Chinese is a tonal language. So that could have various meanings depending on tones that are applied to it. But we're only interested today in learning how to pronounce Chinese names as we'd see them in the student record of the university. We're not going to see tone marks, so we don't know the tones. In other words, that could be Joe, it could be Joe, it could be Joe, it could be various things. We're not going to get into that level of complication. And what we are going to do is still going to get us at a much better level of pronunciation than we might have been previously. Some really basic things about the Chinese language. It uses characters, yeah? So when we see the Chinese language, it's written in a way that means virtually nothing to us at all. Unless we speak Chinese. Pretty much each character we see represents a syllable. Okay? I'm going to be explaining this a little bit more, and we don't need to go into too much detail anyway. This is as complicated as it gets. Okay? Most syllables are composed of an initial and a final component. Okay? I mean, when I say okay, you don't have to say, yeah, you've got it yet. It'll gradually sink in. And as I mentioned just now, what we're going to be introduced to today is a system that renders the sounds of Chinese and those characters into the Roman alphabet letters that certainly as English speakers and most European language speakers we would use. We might think, oh, this is just kind of the Chinese doing it for our own benefit, but actually Mandarin Chinese is the majority language spoken in Chinese. And it's also the lingua franca, it's the language that has been chosen by the Chinese state to be the language that's used in common. Which means that everybody learns Mandarin Chinese from being a little kid at school in China. And it's just one way of helping them learn pronunciations and meanings and so on, is that while they're learning this, as well as learning their characters, which is the hardest thing that they have to do, they also learn the pinyin system, literally kind of pinyin spell sound, so that they can render sounds also in a Roman alphabet. So it's kind of being done for us in the West. It's also being done so that China can communicate better with the outside world, but it's also just used as a kind of teaching aid. And I always take this as a kind of little comfort myself, that while we're learning the pinyin system, Chinese kids have had to do the same as well. So they've had to get through it. Okay, so there's a Chinese name. And it's a reasonably typical Chinese name. I've chosen it simply because it's the name of somebody I correspond with quite a lot, because she helps run our Confucius Institute. So at the bottom of her emails, she'll sign her name. And it's a fairly typical Chinese name. As I say, it's got a family name, a given name that is one syllable, and it's got a two-syllable given name. So let's put that into pinyin. Okay. So her name is Hu. That's if you like, surname, as we'd say. And her first name is Xin Chun. Okay. So her name is Hu Xin Chun. Okay. Now there's already some letters there that are doing weird things for us English speakers, so we've got to learn them. And there's one other little slight complication, is that when she signs the name at the bottom of the email, she also puts it in English, but she puts it as Xin Chun Hu, because we turn, of course, Chinese names around. We have a system, particularly because we're an institution with a big record database, everything has to conform to the same model. So we give family names, we put them at the end. So she can be known over here as Xin Chun Hu. So to show you what's happening here when it's rendered into pinyin, when I'm talking about these initials and finals, you can ignore that from now on, okay? Just know that that is her actual name in Chinese, but we will see it as this. That syllable construction is made up of an initial H and a final U. So together it's U, okay? And then her given name breaks down into two main syllables, Xin and Chun. And these are made up, first of all, of the initial X, which is Sh and In. And then the second syllable is Ch and U. So I hope you can see, basically, we then start to get our head round, and it's basically just by doing this repeatedly that we become familiar, and we can move reasonably quickly towards a situation where we don't have to break that down into those components, we can just start to read it. But what I'm also going to be sending you away with today, I've given you a little practice sheet here. You might not be using to lean and without a desk and write on it. But the crucial thing is this here.
Councillor, sorry.
Yes, you can any time.
Some which causes me great awkwardness and embarrassment.
Yeah.
If I have a colleague or a student who signs their name, in this case, Hu Xin Chen.
Yes.
Chen,
Yes.
if I wanted to talk to another colleague about that person,
Yes.
if they were talking about me, they would refer to me always as Roger Doonan.
Yes.
If I'm referring as well as a Chinese colleague, do I refer to them as Hu Xin Chen or Xin Chen?
You would pretty much always, when you were in the context of being here, refer to them the way the English way round.
Right.
So I would always call her Xin Chun Hu.
Correct.
I might call her Doctor Who.
Yes.
Interesting.
I got one of those, very, very much so. Yes.
I might refer to her as Doctor Who, and I might also use, and I actually can't remember because I haven't used it for ages, she's also used as a Western name as well, which I might use. We can talk about that in a moment. But no, I would always, while I was here, in the context, particularly as academics, as teachers and so on, we would turn it
I
back
really
on.
always say, if I was talking to another Chinese colleague,
Yes,
say,
Oh,
Yang Glenn, about Dr. Shui Tao,
yes.
how should I refer to Dr. Shui Tao?
Well, again, I must admit, in the context of while we're here, would go Dr. Xin Chun Hu. Because basically Chinese people get very used to, while they're being here, of seeing their name the other way around.
Right. Okay.
It can cause complications. I mean, there was a job I was involved in once where I was often giving out students their transcripts of their degrees. And I might be calling out students' names because there'd be a big queue, and people might not recognise their name. One, because my pronunciation wasn't very good, but two, probably because they're listening out for their name the other way around. They're listening out for who? They're listening out for that component of their name. So I would sometimes, when I knew how names worked, you could try then transposing it to get better recognition. But I think, yeah, in your case, most of the time, you'd be talking about Doctor, doing it that way around. So, the initials and the finals is basically how I've laid out this here little sheet, okay? And so, when we're not used to it, and we're going through it a little bit slowly, we're basically looking at a name, and we're working it out first of all in what are the initials and what are the finals. We look them up on here and we stick them together. And hey presto, we've got the pronunciation. All I need to say to you English speakers is that you've got to turn off that part of your brain that doesn't believe the pronunciation. A bit like you earlier on with, that's not goo, is it? No, it's go. And we're a little bit more thought when you do it. But part of our English-speaking brains are always trying to think of mispronouncing in a way, because our brain is geared up for mispronunciation. All we have to do is trust this and go for it. What I want to do now is basically pretty much jump in. If, by the way, we're wondering at all why ZH for J, why not J, it's simply because when the pinyin system was developed, it was developed with Chinese linguists working together with Russian linguists, and they were using systems where they were taking Cyrillic and Westernizing it, coming out of ZHs and things like that. You know, things like, well, I'll come to it in a minute, an example of that. So first of all, the good news, you might as well start with the good and keep things easy. All of these letters are pretty much pronounced as we'd expect them as native English speakers. Okay? So if we see B, P, M, F, D, T, N, L, G, K, H, J, S, we can pretty much pronounce them as we'd expect. B is for bus, P is for pay, N is for most, and so on. So these ones that I've got in black, and on your sheets they're not highlighted in a little grey box, I think they're reasonably obvious. They're either completely obvious to us or they'd be a fair guess for us. I don't want you to actually worry too much about this technical pronunciation of sounds in the middle column. Pretty much ignore that. Just think, if you see a B, look at how you pronounce it. Bus, think, B. Yeah? Okay? These ones, which you might just about be able to see, I picked out in red, are the ones which I think are, odd. Again, for us English speakers in particular. And what we have to do is we have to learn them, essentially. Q in English, first the thing about Q is it always needs a U in English, so it can make words like queen and quick and so on. When we as English speakers see a Q on its own, we think exotic language, so we think what can it be? It could be Q as in Qatar, the Gulf states, it'll be cut, it'll be a cut sound or something like that. Or otherwise it's qua. But we're not expecting as English speakers for a Q to be pronounced anything like cheese. So we just have to learn that Q is. Okay, apologies for Chinese speakers looking at my poor pronunciation, but the big knowledge here for native English speakers and other European languages is nothing at all Q-like, is sh. Okay? X, somewhere between a s and a sh. So the Chinese word for thank you, xie xie, is this sound with X, okay? Z is Z, as in suds. Z. So it's a strange sound, it's a buzzing sound made with tongue and with the mouth. Z. Here's one of the giveaways that there are Russians involved in this system, C being S. So when I was a kid and growing up in the space age and you'd see these Soviet astronauts going off, it looked like CCCP on their things. R. So the Soviet Union. So it's a S, as in cats. Okay. Now why I put these in red and why I've highlighted them in kind of grey gold on your sheets is that we just have to learn these. There's no way. C in English is cat or circle. It's never tss. It is always tss in Chinese pronunciation, okay? ZH we've seen before, it's essentially like jam. R is a really difficult one that I don't want English speakers to worry too much about because we won't see it in names that often. But it's a rolled R that at times almost comes like a Y. So Chinese word for people or person, then. So it's a little bit difficult. You think of pleasure, but luckily we don't see loads of them in names, so we don't need to worry too much about it. You can.
About the difference between, say, keyword shade, I think the same in is cheese or
Yes.
ham, so they're the same to me.
Yes, and they, to be absolutely honest, because you're Japanese?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. To English speakers, they sound pretty similar. To Chinese speakers, they're very different. And the best I could give you quickly is the difference between sort of ch as in cheese and ch as in change. I struggle with this when I'm learning words like chi, go, and things like that with a ch sound. And my teacher is always trying to get to the big ch sound. But if you think of the difference between cheese and change, you won't, as an English speaker, I can virtually not. And it's only by stressing the term cheese change. Essentially, all I want us to do as English speakers is I go ch, which looking to ch sound, because we're already going to be well in advance of why are we doing this? At least a fifth now of our students are Chinese. I work in international student support. I'm working every day with Chinese, and I know you go to China, I think, and do. But you're in the archaeology department.
I am.
Yeah. And so we're getting all sorts of links, and I'm a great believer that if communication is the way that we make really good links with each other, and if we're already stumbling down on even basic pronunciations of names, we're falling down. Conversely, if we start even minutely improving our pronunciations, it does make a huge difference. Just one example of this, I was doing a focus group about a year or two ago, and there was a Chinese student involved, and his name was Qing. And I said, I believe you're Qing. And his eyes lit up because this is the first time ever in 2 years at university anyone had got remotely close to pronouncing his name. Most people are calling him King, guessing that the Q is going to be doing something exotic like Qatar. Qing. So it's kind of, it's making those connections, and those of us who are teachers or student supporters, it does make a, and speaking to colleagues of course as well. Again, ones in red, these combinations, overview we've already looked at. O, E is en, as in taken. Right, we don't have time to just go through it. It's basically learning them, and the quick way of doing this is don't worry about the ones that are just in black or highlighted. Concentrate on the ones that are highlighted that are a bit difficult for us, certainly as English speakers. And then we go on to various combinations. And one, this was a big stumbling block for me when I was first learning Mandarin, still is occasionally, is I, which is, always pronounced E, as in T, unless it's after Z, C, S, Z, H, C, H, S, H, and R. It'd be like a version of the English I before E except after C. I is pronounced E, unless it's after Z, C, S, Z, H, C, H, S, H, and R. So you effectively just have to get your I in with that. And when it's going to be E, and when it's going to be the, or essentially that sound. Okay, so what I'm basically doing here is simply introducing you to the pronunciations you can see on that sheet. So So I won't go spend ages on this. What I'll do instead is we'll start practicing some sounds. That's the way we're going to do it. And don't forget my Dr. Tim's guarantee. I will send you away, if you're not already a Chinese speaker, I'll send you away with better pronunciations after these few minutes than you had before. On this first sheet of sounds, I've made things slightly simpler by breaking down the initials and finals. The initials are in black and the finals are in blue. But once we move on, we won't do that. So, and I am pretty much speaking only here, I think, to people who aren't Chinese speakers. How might we then, do we think we might pronounce that first sound? So if you don't know, you would have to go by, are you going to go for it?
Zhong.
Not bad. Look up your ONG.
I didn't look at that.
Yeah, so you've got to guess.
Zhong.
Yeah, sort of jaw. Jaw. It's a very important word in sound actually. It means, amongst other things, depending on what tone it's got, middle. And in Zhongguo, Middle Kingdom, it means, thank you, it means China. So if you're going to learn one sound, being able to go towards the pronunciation of Zhongguo, China, would be quite a good one. Okay, next one I've given you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're happy with Sir. Okay, and now I'm deliberately putting in some little tricky ones to get our confidence up quickly. So remember what I said about C, it's nothing like you expect.
Say.
Very close. So I'm liking your t's. What about the UI? Like it. Good. Sway. And I know this from experience, the only reason you hesitated and your pronunciation wasn't so good to start with is English-speaking brain doesn't like things like just doesn't like it. It's the reason that Snottingham became Nottingham after the Anglo-Saxons had been beaten by the Normans. We don't like sounds like snip. So we don't like sw either. But all we have to do, if you think about it as it's two parts, s and way, and then put them together, sway. Okay? Q followed by IU. Anybody else want to go? You're getting there. Do you want to have a go with this?
Sure.
Yes, I like that. Show. Where I've got this little E in brackets because it can be dealt with so quickly you'll hardly sound it. Here, show. Essentially becoming show. Okay? And then this word, to thank, double it up and it means thank you. Thank.
This one is easily pronounced.
Easy?
Foreigners.
Easy to pronounce. Okay, so our Chinese speakers are telling us this one's easy, so let's give it a go. Who can do this easy one? I disagree. I think it's difficult. I heard that. Shit. Okay? Shit. How we go for it? You pronounce it? Yes. Thank you. Shit. It must be terrible for Chinese speakers to have to listen to that. But we're heading in the right direction. Shit. So shit. Thank you.
Yeah? Use both AS or SH on the side in Chinese.
Yeah, sorry, I should explain this a bit more. It's not that they're the same, it's just that this is one of the few instances where you get regional variations to a certain extent. I would go to more like a sh sound, okay? But you will also hear, I hear people say shit. Or that's what it will sound like to an English speaker. But I would probably go with shit. And X is essentially shit. Briefly, just to get it out of the way, certainly when I've been learning Mandarin Chinese and when I've been learning Arabic, which have always seemed a bit difficult. Of those two, I don't think Chinese is a really difficult one, Arabic. But what they both have in common is that pronunciations are really important. And unlike learning other European languages, your teacher will spend a lot of time giving you mouth shapes and where the tongue goes and where it goes through the teeth. It's the weakest part of my language because you have to put so much effort into it. So that's where we're going to slightly fall down with our pronunciation. But Chinese people are normally quite forgiving of what they get used to hearing. And they'll be able to see the difference a lot of the time between our chiz and our ch and things like that. So I really don't think, from my experience, we should worry too much about it. Some more sounds before we end up going on to real names, folks. Let's rattle through these then. So, CAI.
I'm thinking Russian tea side.
There we go. So we're already cooking on gas, as they say. Psi. Q, UAN. Chuen. We see this and we tend to go a little bit and, it's more like as in, taking chuen. Okay? C-O-N-G. C-O-N-G. Yeah, I like that. Song. That's what, I'm sure that's what you said. Song. D-U-O. None of these are easy. Is it? Depending on, again, the tones, but a very common word because it means kind of many.
Yes.
Yeah.
People laugh when you have to tell her name in Canaan's version.
Exactly. How would we go for this pronunciation? This one here. I suspect that's your speaking.
The top one.
So what would we do?
My own shameful.
That would be Dodo Chan. D-U-O, anybody? So look up on your sheet. Let's do this together, okay? How can we do this? So we're looking at the initials. We look for D. We go boom. It's as in dog. So it's the same as English. Brilliant. Then we look up U-O, and it's war. War. So how do we put them together? War. Yeah, and it isn't an obvious sound in English at all. It's a very common word you'll hear people talk about dwarf, very many things. Dwarf. Okay? And I put these deliberately together because they look similar, but of course these vowels are the other way around. So let's do this again together. D for dog. Brilliant. Done it. We know that bit already. O-U. Let's look it up. O-U, 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 O-U. As in go. Put them together. Dog. There we go. So if your student is this, she'll be called one.
She won't tell me.
I don't know.
I don't ask. She won't tell me the answer.
I worked with this Chinese intern for quite a while, whose name was W-E-N-H-U-I. I normally have a pen with me, but I don't have. So I said to her, I presume your name would be pronounced Wen Hui. And she said, yeah, that's fine. And it was only when she'd made videos for our team in Mandarin Chinese and she introduced herself to the audience as Wen Hui that I realised that my pronunciation was nowhere near, but she was so polite, as most Chinese students will be. You know, I was just going along with this fairly poor pronunciation. So yeah, you have to persist with that. Seriously, tell me how your name is pronounced. Right. So we are moving finally towards people's names, but I want to just have a quick stop off on the names of places because they're also useful to us as well. And I start off with this top one, not just because it's the capital city of China, but also because it illustrates rather nicely how, certainly for English speakers, we can slightly over-exoticize things. And when this city had the Olympic Games in 2008, that's when Westerners really started using this name. Very briefly, the system of Romanizing Chinese sounds that we used to use was a system called the Wade-Giles system, which brings this out as Peking. Okay. So, we are relatively unused still, even though pinyin has been used in China since 1958. We are still catching up with it. We still see, when I was learning Chinese history at school, in the last years of the life of Chairman Mao, we would have him written as Mao Zedong, rather than now you'll see Mao Zedong, so Z-E-D-O-U-N-G. Better pronunciation and a more consistent system. So, anyway, what am I getting at? How are we going to pronounce that?
Beijing.
There we go. How are you going to pronounce it? Beijing. How are you going to pronounce it?
Chinese.
Go on, say it.
Beijing.
Beijing. Beijing. The crucial, all I'm saying here is that this Beijing crept in because nobody wants to call it as simple as Beijing. That looks too obvious. So 9 out of 10 cats and newsreaders will pronounce it Beijing. Ignore them. And once you start pronouncing it Beijing, your Chinese students and colleagues will immediately be more impressed because they feel, they're actually pronouncing it in the correct way. They're not over-exoticizing the J. It's just a J, Beijing. So, Bei, north, Jing, capital city, the northern capital. So Nanjing, southern capital. One of the lovely things about Chinese is that the way words are made up is just putting blocks together. If you know one block, if I want to know Bei is north, you can see words with that in, they're going to have something to do with north and so on. A lot of our students come from here. My student Wen Pei did, and I horribly mispronounced not just her name, but where she came from. So let's go for it now. We used to be able to cop out as English people because we used the Cantonese, we called it Canton. Yeah. So much easier. But now let's do it in Pinyin. So we're looking up G. That's good, that's good. UAN. When. Or UANG, we should look up, sorry. UANG is the important one. And then it's our friend ZHOU. So anybody go for it? Guangzhou. So lots of students from there, big city, well worth having in our, these are all big cities here. What about the next one? So how are we going to be looking up CH, then we're going OMG, then we're going Q, and then we're going ING. If we put it all together, Chongqing. Yeah, Chongqing. And this, of course, is, I can't stress enough, because we have consistency in Pinyin pronunciation. With this city here, we can already guess at part of it. So we've got Zhou. So let's have a go at the whole thing. Hangzhou. Okay? And this one's worth learning. Certainly when I was in China, I used this a lot because it's my favourite Chinese beer. There we go. She's giving it away. Qingdao. So, and I hope you're seeing, English speakers, that your brain will start to be happier with this. Starting to see Q's as ch. Starting to see the AO as ow. Qingdao.
Qingdao.
Yeah.
Is that what everyone is also says Tsingtao?
Well, right, so there we go. If you buy the beer over here, it'll say on the label Tsingtao.
Right.
That's the way Charles thing. When you're next in China, pronounce it Qingdao when you order one, and they'll go, yeah.
Excellent.
Then you want free. Yeah.
Completely unexpected. It's been fantastic so far.
Qingdao. Right, and finally, we are onto real people's names. I haven't just plucked these random, I haven't made them up. These are either, with the odd exception of the odd film star and basketball player, they are all names of students of ours, either people I've worked with or that I've randomly plucked out of the student record just because they're useful combinations of letters. So let's do the first one together. So we're looking at the X, so that is Sh. IANG. We look it up alphabetically. Yang, so Xiang. And then L is yeah. And IO, IU. Yeah. So we put it together. Xiangliu. I've gone for the, I haven't put the SH, the H gets sort of there, but Xiang or Xiangliu. Xiangliu. Everybody reasonably happy with that? Yeah. I love having Chinese with the audience. They go, Xiangliu. Okay, the next one. I would always start at the bits we know. We've got that, nail. Jiao. Yeah. No worries. H, we know it's her. AI, hi. Q is, Ing is, in this case. Yeah, it's the ONG which becomes Some of them are a bit, The ING stays the same, so let's stick it all together, folks. Yay! Hai Qin Jiao. Hai Qin Jiao. Hai Qin Jiao. Right, let's go for it in the last 5 minutes. Let's get quicker and quicker. That's good. That's not difficult. They are essentially, just to be fair, they mean the same, right, don't they? Yellow. Wang, Wang. Oh no, not Wang. Wang is like king and president. I was thinking of Wang for a moment. Sorry. I had a student I worked with a lot who's from, kind of grew up in Hong Kong and Shanghai. And his name is Wang, and he told me it's the same as Huang. Yellow, yeah. But sorry, this isn't. This could mean various things depending on its tone. It could well be king. So Wang, we're happy with. What about the first name? Yes. Yep. Xiao Ying Wang. Xiao Ying Wang. Okay, next one. We've got only one more sheet of these and we're already warming up, we're speeding up nicely. Not the nice few Chinese speakers. They're dying to go, I know what it is.
Because it was some celebrity's name.
Yes, I know. Yeah, you just love seeing their name here. Yes! Hua Shao. Hua Shao. Was he play basketball, a film star or something?
Basketball? No. He's a host.
He's a TV
host.
Yeah, right, that's it. I just remembered that I took one or two just well-known names, but I couldn't remember what they were famous for. So he's a TV host, yeah? Hua Shao. So you see the Hua Shao show when you're over in China. Next one. You, sir, English native speaker. Let's go for this. Build it up, bit by bit. Yeah. Nice and loud. Okay, let's literally do it bit by bit. So, G, yeah? UI. I mean, you'd have to write it down. Wei, yeah? You'd have to write it down to make it easier for you. Gui. Gui Yin. Yeah, wow, that's it. I'm sorry to get you to kind of do this in public, but what I absolutely know is that literally all we have to do is get that confidence of, could it really be Gui Yin Huang? Yeah, yeah. You know, just, and it is easier when you first are looking at Chinese names, write them down bit by bit. Write down G, Wei, yeah, G, Wei, Yin, He, Wang, yeah? And then practice the name, Wei Yin Huang, Wei Yin Huang. So when you see the student or whatever, you've got the name. But I'm obviously not pretending you at this stage will be able to do this immediately. But if you get into the discipline of building up the little bits, the good news is that you know that consistently then always you've got it. You've got it. So look at this. Couldn't be easier now.
Changzhou.
Changzhou. Changzhou, yo ho. There we go, Changzhou. And I think I've got, in the last 5 minutes, we've just got a final list. Let's go for it now. Come on, guys, let's go for it. Top one.
Xiaoli.
Xiaoli. Yep, that's all it is. Xiaoli.
Wei
This I deliberately put in because a colleague of mine was terrified because this student was about to turn up at the desk. And she said to me, Tim, please help me out. You know how to pronounce Chinese names. I'm horrified by this because my brain is screaming to say yucky cow. Which, from what I've been saying, you know, that would be a perfectly reasonable English pronunciation guess. She approved. So what can we do? Do you want to give it a go? Not so. There's a clue. It's not yucky cow.
Probably. What is the
Oh, okay, sorry, yeah, because I'm used to saying, right, yucky is a kind of a slang word in English meaning horrible.
Yeah.
Cow, it's a horrible cow.
Well,
it would be the kind of insult that children would use in the playground about you yucky cow. Yeah. Yucky is a kind of child. Kind of word, yeah. So she honestly thought, and once she thought yucky cow, she couldn't get it out of her head. What are we going to go with? Exactly, thank you. You cheat, Sam. And you know, the look on my colleague's face of utter relief of something a lot more better. Here's the student I was telling you about, who worked with me making videos in Mandarin. So I called her Wen Hui, and she said, yeah, perfect, fine, good, well done. And then actually a Chinese, well no, overcomplicated, but a Chinese colleague from Beijing that I was working with one time said, actually she would pronounce that Hui. Sorry, Hui. Yeah, she said she would call that one, but I can tell you, she herself doesn't pronounce it Wen. I can't remember that. Wen, she pronounced it Wen. UI.
Way.
Wen Hui. Wen Hui. Wu Wen Hui. And just to get this out of the way, so if she was introducing herself, so at the beginning of the video she said, Wo jiao Wu Wen Hui. My name is, I am called Wen Hui Hu, Wen Hui Wu. But she, of course, puts it round the proper way. It does cause difficulty. All of these people back in China will be using their names the other way around. So do bear that in mind. This is a student who helped me develop this course. Anybody? So G is good. I'm going to concentrate on you guys here. Yeah, go for it. Or, yeah. Yes. Or yin ma. Yeah, that's it. Or strictly speaking, or yin ma. Because I checked. This is the sound that's most commonly used to teach tones in Chinese. And so you've got ma, 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 and ma. And they each mean something different. So I checked with Guo Ying, and I said, does your name mean horse? She said, yes it does. So then I knew it was ma. Third tone. If it was ma, it would mean mother, mum. If it was ma, it would mean flax. Ma, horse, ma. 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 That's to tell someone off, scold. Ma. Ma. Don't do that. So, but no, her name means horse, so it's Guo Ying Ma. But the point is, as Guo Ying Ma, what Chinese would think of as a neutral tone, we are in good common ground. She would know that's what we're talking about. And finally, guys, this is sounding good. Go for it. Ooh, that's perfect. What about that?
I didn't know.
Yeah, this is
Leo.
Leo, yeah.
Leo, yes, Leo.
Xiao Yun Leo. And even me with my very, I think I'm officially classified as level 2 beginners Chinese, so I'm kind of, at least I'm not right at the bottom of the heap. Even I can see 2 words there, but when I was using this name in a group of staff once, she was here with me because she was another student who helped me help people with pronunciations. And they said, does your name mean something? And she said, yes, it does. It means little cloud. Xiao, little, Yun, cloud, means little cloud. And then we had quite a nice discussion about Chinese names and how they mean things. One of my tutors was called Gan, kind of strong, kind of iron, kind of very masculine name, and the names tend to be quite gendered like that. This is, a fairly typical sort of feminine name, little cloud, something like that. But the discussion, I'll just mention this finally, the discussion then went on to the fact that for the 2 years that I knew her when she was in Sheffield, I never called her Xiao Yun, I called her Michelle. And that's simply because that's how she introduced herself to me. And probably 90% of Chinese people, when they're over here, will use a Western name quite. Do you use Western names?
Yeah.
What's your name?
Oscar.
Oscar.
Yeah, the boy's name.
Both now. Okay, Oscar.
Vicky.
Vicky. There we go. Oscar and Vicky.
Vicky's very popular.
Vicky. Well, you see, the good thing about Vicky, and unlike Oscar, it's easy, and it's got this nice. Wen Wei called herself. Well, actually, she called herself Wen Wei. She only calls herself Vivi when she's on WeChat and Weibo and things like that. She decided that she wouldn't use her Western name while she was over here because it would add to the confusion. But I'd say the great majority of Chinese students do. Michelle, a lot of them are kind of these nice Frenchy little names, particularly for females. And then you get names like Oscar, which are actually less common in English. You see names like Victoria and things like this, and I can never think when I try to think of them. But sometimes we think in the West, oh, this is a name that hasn't been used so often, so commonly again. Point is, she introduced herself to me as Michelle. She reminded me that a lot of Chinese people get these names when you're at school, don't you? You're learning English, so you're given an English kind of name, or then you just put on one later. The crucial thing is that we needn't be worried about using them if that's how we're introduced to being by the individual. Hi, my name is Michelle. I would always call her Michelle, unless there's quite a few students I know who, when they go back to China, they go back to using their Chinese name, and I don't just use their Chinese name. So I've got a student I still work with who's called Jing, but she was called Helen for 3 years while she was here. So it adds slightly to the confusion, and when you're dealing with students by email or whatever, and they sign off Michelle, I go, dear Michelle, and just make sure it's
There always gives me a little bit of tension, isn't it? It also feels a little bit sort of colonialist as well.
Yeah.
Forcing language on others when,
Yes.
you know, and I think one of the surrounding department is quite sensitive about that, and I think we try to open the conversation up. It doesn't open up, and therefore we feel as though it's even more tense and approaching it in class play. We're trying to understand this.
Yeah, what I do with you guys is reassure yourselves that these are names that the people are happily using, and that they're using them almost just in a learning English context. Because I totally know what you mean. It's like, you know, and why shouldn't we pronounce their name?
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
everyone bending over backwards to English speakers because it's a world language. But over the past few years, I've kind of reassured myself that because I actually see Chinese people using their Western names with each other. Even when they're in China sometimes, it becomes part of their identity, rightly or wrongly. A bit like when I was learning German and Timothy. So when I was learning French, I was called Timothée. When I was learning German, the teacher called me Thomas, because they don't really have an equivalent to Timothy that they use very much. And still in my head, part of me is Thomas. You know, and particularly when I'm going to start speaking German, I'm thinking about German. I become Thomas. So these names do become part of people's identity. Michelle told me she'd been Michelle since she was this big, you know.
Right.
So, yeah, okay. Right, I think that's, oh it is, yeah, definitely time. I don't think I have to be kicked out of here for 5 more minutes. If anybody, here's the kicker out. If anybody has got a question, please do ask. Otherwise,
I will.